So looking at this actual team and what may play out on the court in this forthcoming season, what is just the biggest storyline that you personally are going to be monitoring throughout the year?
Yeah. So this one's pretty obvious. It's Cade. How good does Cade look with the roster more suited to his talents, right? Because we've complained about it, and even through all the complaining, he was a lot better last year. He was a 24-5 and 7.5 guy. He shot 39 like and a half percent from three after the All-Star break. Like those are
backs for falling. You love to see it.
Those were very good numbers, and they coincided with just like adding Simone Fontecchio and not much else, and like getting rid of the Killian Hayeses and Isaiah Liverses of the team, who are just like not real NBA players, right? And so with less of a phone booth, with better talent around him, with other guys who might be able to make some shots around him, could he be like a 26-5-9 guy? Like that's kind of an all-star. Like Tyrese Maxey was an all-star last year, and he was a 26-4-6 guy, right? And so it's like, if Cade can get to that level of production and the team can find some level of success on the court, some amount of wins, not lose 25 plus games in a row, it's like you have a narrative around like the team building something, Cade being a large part of that, and him being acknowledged kind of in the media, in the national media, and like by his peers as like a guy who's like willing, who's been able to do like the things for them.
Why do you think, you just said something that made me think of it. Why do you think that there seems to be so much division over him? Is it because, okay, so we have this track record of injuries, and then last year, everyone kind of latched on to the turnover issue, which got better. But like, if you weren't watching, and I guess this amounts to me being condescending, I hate playing if you weren't watching the Pistons card, but it seems like even with players who are more established, something might happen in the first like 10, 15 games, quarter of the season. And like, that's the storyline that defines the rest of their year, almost regardless of what is actually happening. What do you think makes him such a divisive figure in I guess it's the, would you build around this player discourse, basically?
Yeah. I think it's the fact that nothing about him is really like, he doesn't stand out in any like one area of the game, right? He's not he's a really good passer. He's made himself more of a shooter over the last season, but before that he was really inefficient and he turned the ball over a lot, didn't really get to the rim, never shot any free throws. And so again, like if you were only turning the Pistons on like during the 28 game losing streak, which I think was still like before Christmas, it's like, okay, like this team's going nowhere. This guy's like not able to elevate them. And so it's like, we can kind of write him off. But I think the team was so bad last year. There were just so many non-functional NBA players around him. And the skill set that he has was just like not, because he's not a guy who's going to go out and score 40. It was like, because he's a guy who wants to kind of play slower and kind of dissect defenses. I think that like he wasn't able to lead the team to wins, and people just kind of took that in a poor way, as a poor reflection of himself. Like you look at like Paulo Banchero was like equally as inefficient, but like slightly more productive, but his team was winning. And he got a lot of credit for that. He gets a lot of kudos for that. I think team success will lead to people viewing Cade in a more favorable light, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. What does the next frontier for him look like? You mentioned sort of the rim stuff, and I'd mentioned in the notes, it sometimes feel like he might have that extra gear, like let's flip the dial and get a little bit faster rather than, relying on, I don't know, hesitations or like bailing out too early on his drives. And he does still, maybe the lower body injuries have impacted it, but like you've seen him turn corners sometimes and like get by people. And if he did that more consistently, is that a spacing thing? Maybe now that it'll be better around him, he could get there, or is it just something else entirely that you're looking at for his development?
No, I'm looking at rim finishing, but I'm looking at him adding strength, right? The thing that really stood out to me last season was as he got stronger and as he got better, using his body to carve out space, you could really see that there were times where you were reminded like, oh yeah, he's 6'6", and like he can extension finish around bigs, or if he gets into the paint with no help, like he can finish over and around guys. It's still below the rim, right? but he can still do that. Like stylistically, he does still love those mid-range jumpers, and he's very good at them. But you do wish some of those were like paint touches and kickouts. I wish some of those were like 10-foot floaters instead of 15-foot like pump fake, pump fake, pump fake shot. But I do think that he will always kind of be who he is. He'll always be a change of pace operator. That's how he wants to play. But like Dan, you watch Jalen Brunson, right? Like Jalen Brunson would just
No.
like pick people apart from like inside 12 feet. And like as long as you get into the paint and pressure the defense, like you can figure stuff out from there. I think Cade like absolutely has the potential to do that, and that will be the thing I'm looking for him to do this season.
You mentioned someone with his size and Jalen Brunson's like footwork. That's a nasty basketball player.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the other thing is too, like as the roster gets better, like we talk about the spacing being something good for him, obviously, but with the spacing being better and with his teammates being able to hit more shots, he'll be able to distribute a lot more. And I think his distribution is something that doesn't get enough play because his teammates like don't hit enough shots, right? He's a guy.
I think he's a really, really good passer, and maybe some of it's like
really good passer.
like he
When
just
he's
the
not
size
passing
and the
to
ability
his-
to see things. And so I am very anxious to see, not anxious, excited to see what he could do with what I assume will be better spacing. But that does kind of lead me into what I guess my biggest question for this team would be: how challenging is it to integrate, even whether it's like together or separately, just the primary kids on this roster, where the two things that stand out to me is, even if you don't think there are a ton of redundancies, the Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, Ron Holland, Jalen Duren, for like they don't feel particularly complimentary. And the other thing that I haven't seen it get a ton of run, but like one of these five, like Cade is there. So one of these four guys is this front office's guy. And like the other three kind of aren't. And so like how could that impact like the priorities or how these players are used? How challenging do you see like just the integration of all four of them together? So like whatever.
So I think like not all of the kids are gonna make it, and not all of the kids are gonna make it in Detroit. Like I just probability wise, like that's going to happen. So the thing I'm looking at, especially for this season, is Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey, and that's because they're going to be extension eligible this offseason. And so you need to figure out what you have in these guys. So A, you can figure out if you're going to pay them or not. And B, if you are going to pay them, you need to figure out how much, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fair to say Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren like aren't going to get the $200 million that we saw Cade get, but like could they get smaller extensions, right? Could they get the like I think of it as the Norm Powell. It's not the Norm Powell anymore, but like the post rookie extension that's not a max, right? And so that's really important. And before the kids as a whole, it's really about who can play with Cade, right? And that answering that question, I think, is going to be paramount. Right now, I think it's really clear that like, Duren is the most clear pairing with Cade. We'll talk about Duren a little bit later. The idealized versions of Ron Holland and Asar Thompson can absolutely like play off Cade. Both of those guys are like under 22, and it's going to take a while to get to those idealized versions. And so we'll see if those happens. But also importantly, you don't have to pay either one of those guys for like 2-3 years, right? And so that means Jaden Ivey's the big major question mark about A, like can he play with Cade, and B, like if he can't, what do you do with him? And if he can, what do you do with a guy like that, right?